Welcome to this lesson on sampling and surveys. Whenever we collect data, we need to think about who we are collecting it from, and whether our sample fairly represents the larger group. The LANTITE regularly asks you to evaluate whether a survey's conclusions are valid, spot sources of bias, and decide whether results can be generalized. These are essential critical thinking skills for both the test and your future teaching career. By the end of this lesson, you will understand the difference between a population and a sample, know the main sampling methods, be able to identify sources of bias, understand how sample size affects reliability, and know when it is valid to generalize from a sample to a population. Let's begin with the fundamentals. The population is the entire group you want to learn about. The sample is the smaller subset you actually survey. We use samples because it is usually impractical to survey everyone. For example, to understand student satisfaction at a school of 800 students, you might survey 100. The key question is always, does the sample fairly represent the population? If it does, we can generalize the results. If it does not, our conclusions may be wrong. There are 4 main sampling methods you need to know. Random sampling gives every member of the population an equal chance of being selected like drawing names from a hat. Systematic sampling selects every nth person from a list, for example, every 10th student on the roll. Stratified sampling divides the population into group strata and samples from each in proportion, such as sampling from each year level in a school. Convenient sampling surveys whoever is easiest to reach, like surveying people at the front gate. Random and stratified sampling tend to be the most representative. Convenient sampling is the most common source of bias. Let's identify sampling methods. Scenario A uses a random number generator, that is random sampling. Scenario B surveys every 5th parent, that is systematic. Scenario C samples proportionally from each year level, that is stratified. Scenario D surveys classmates at lunch, that is convenient sampling, and it is likely biased because it only captures one friendship group, or 1 year level. On the LANTITE, you will be given a scenario and asked to name the method or explain its strengths and weaknesses. Bias means the sample does not fairly represent the population. There are 4 main types to know. Selection bias, some groups are over or underrepresented, like only surveying parents at morning drop-off, which misses working parents. Response bias, people give socially desirable answers instead of honest ones. Non-response bias, the people who do not respond may have different views from those who do. Question bias, the wording pushes respondents toward a particular answer. On the LANTITE, you will be asked to identify which type of bias is present. A school surveys 500 families about a uniform policy, but only 120 respond, a 24% response rate. This is quite low and raises several concerns. Non-response bias, the 76% who did not respond may hold different views. Selection biasless engaged families may not return the survey. Response bias, parents may feel pressure to agree with the school. The conclusion is that the school cannot confidently say these 120 responses represent all 500 families. They should try to increase the response rate before drawing conclusions. Sample size has a huge impact on reliability. Survey A asks 5 students and gets 80% saying maths. Survey B asks 200 students and gets 45%. Survey B is far more reliable because one student changing their answer in Survey A shifts the result by 20 percentage points, whereas in Survey B, it shifts by only half a percentage point. Larger samples produce more stable, trustworthy results. But there are diminishing returns. Going from 5 to 50 makes a big difference, going from 500 to 5,000 much less so. Let's practice deciding when results can be generalized. Scenario A, 300 randomly selected Australian parents, 65% support homework. This is valid. The sample is random, reasonably large, and the conclusion matches the population. Scenario B, 50 private school parents, 90% support uniforms. This cannot be generalized to all Australian parents because private school parents are not representative of everyone. Scenario C, 8 teachers, 75% prefer digital textbooks. The sample is far too small. On the LANTITE, check 3 things. Is the sample large enough? Is it representative? And does the conclusion match the population that was actually surveyed? Let's design a fair survey. A school wants feedback on playground equipment. Option A surveys only Year 6. This misses younger students who may use different equipment. Option B relies on newsletter responses. Self-selection bias means only interested families respond. Option C uses stratified sampling, 20 students randomly selected from each year level. This is the best approach because it ensures every year level is represented. A good survey needs a representative sample, adequate size, neutral questions, and a decent response rate. Here are the key mistakes to avoid. First, generalizing from a convenient sample. Just because your friends think something does not mean everyone does. Second, ignoring the response rate. A survey with a 20% response rate is much less reliable than one with 80%. Third, using leading questions. The wording of a question can push people towards a particular answer. Fourth, confusing the sample with the population. Always check whether the conclusion extends beyond who was actually surveyed. Pause the video and try these 6 problems. Problem 1 asks you to identify a sampling method. Problem 2 tests whether you can spot selection bias. Problem 3 is about sample size. Problem 4 asks you to evaluate whether a conclusion is valid. Problem 5 tests your understanding of question bias. Problem 6 asks you to choose the best sampling method for a scenario. Check your answers when you are ready. Let's recap the key points. We use samples to learn about populations because surveying everyone is usually impractical. The best methods are random and stratified sampling. Convenient sampling is often biased. Watch for selection, response, non-response, and question bias. Larger samples are more reliable, but even a large sample is useless if it is not representative. You can only generalize results when the sample is both large enough and representative of the population. On the LANTITE, always ask, is the sample representative, is it large enough, and does the conclusion match who was actually surveyed? Good luck!